So, Rick Witter, lead singer and frontman of Shed 7, welcome to my channel.
Hello, James. Thank you very much for having me.
Shed 7 were a massive part of the indie Britpop movement in the 90s. Can you tell us how the band started?
Me and Paul Banks, the guitarist, and Tom Gladwin, the bass guitarist, all went to school together. We were in the same year at school, so we all met when we were 11. You know, obviously very young. We'd kind of scour over our music collections and copy what other bands were doing at the time. It's a good way of kind of trying to write songs. Lots of bands still do it now, and they're well within the 40s or the 50s, and they're still copying other people. But I mean, we'd sit there for hours designing record sleeves for the songs that we'd yet to write, you know, even down to drawing the barcode on the back. We were that kind of anal about it. I think we left school in about 87, 88, and then the Stone Roses happened. Gave us a kick up the arse a bit and thought, right, well, if we really want to take this seriously, we've got to start really honing our craft. So, yeah, that's when Shed 7 kind of started, around about the late 80s, 1990 maybe. And the rest, as they say, is history.
And then it was 3 years, wasn't it, when you guys signed with Polydor, a 6-album deal, I think?
Yes, that's what happened at the very end of 93, yes. And then we started releasing records at the beginning of 94, yes. It all seems so long ago now. The Manchester thing came and went, and then in around about 1992, it was a little bit more kind of acid and rave. We genuinely thought that we were probably the only guitar band in the country trying to do something, when realistically you've got your Blue Tones down south, you've got your Sleeper, your Cast, you've got your Oasis, obviously, all dotted up and down the country doing a similar thing, but probably thinking they were the only ones doing it. It kind of crashed together, didn't it, in about 94, in the respect of suddenly there was a big scene, which obviously became known as Britpop. But none of us were aware of that in the build-up to it. We genuinely thought we were the only band doing what we were doing.
What a fascinating parallel with what's happening now in the music scene, how there's very little in the way of proper guitar bands, and every guitar band starting to build up feels like they're just on an island in an ocean of dance music and crap. Look at the situation back then, 92. I looked back over the charts recently in that year, and I was like, wow, there's like nothing here, nothing for indie and rock and guitar, almost nothing. And then obviously a few years later it explodes. But that's really interesting what you said about how all the guitar bands up and down the country at that time felt like they were the only ones. It's very similar today, I reckon.
I agree, but in this day and age, with the social media, and a lot of bands do it themselves these days, which is kind of a positive and a negative all at the same time. And there is an awful lot of young guitar bands out there at the minute. It's just a little bit more difficult to ply your trade. It's very cyclical in the sense that, you know, a scene gets quite big and then lots of other bands jump on that scene and it kind of waters it down, and then it becomes a little bit null and void. And that will just happen until none of us are here anymore, I think.
That's a nice positive note to finish on that. So who were your influences amongst the band? You said you listened to a lot of records and you try and draw inspiration from what you were listening to. Who were you listening to?
This is why me and Paul, we've got a good, rich musical history between us, really, because I was always U2 and he was always Simple Minds. He was really big on Duran Duran for a long time. And then we shared a similar love of bands like the Smiths. And then, as I've already touched upon, the Stone Roses came along, and then we all got into the kind of Manchester thing. So primarily kind of guitar-based bands is what we were really loving at the time.
You mentioned the influence of the Stone Roses. I heard a story from someone down at Rockfield that you guys actually went to Rockfield and met the Stone Roses while you were there.
Yeah, we did, yes. So this is probably around about mid to late 93. We were all huge fans, loved the first album, and then they went on this massive 5-year hideaway. And we'd heard a little rumour that they were recording an album in a studio in Wales, and we're from York. And at the time, we'd started to get a little bit of a mention every now and again in Your Enemies and Your Melody Makers. I think we were in this chart, top up-and-coming new bands, and we were kind of number 3 in that. On a hunch, we decided to drive all the way to Wales on the hope that the Stone Roses were in this recording studio doing their second album. And this studio is in the middle of nowhere. I remember the entrance to it was a really long dirt track. So we found it, drove up to the front of the studio, There was just a couple of cars parked outside. One of us went up to the front door and knocked on it, and this lad came out, and we said, "Oh, we've heard a rumour the Stone Roses are here. Just wondering if that's true." And he said, "Oh, no, that's not true." So we were all a bit kind of disappointed and walking back to the van, and then suddenly Ian Brown walked around the side of the building. Oh, so they are here then. So we're kind of saying, "I'm really sorry. We're big fans, and we've just discovered you were here. We just thought we'd come down." And then he saw Shed 7 written on the back of our van and went, "Oh yeah, Shed 7, I've heard of you." So it was just a really touching moment for us that Ian Brown had actually even heard of us. So he invited us in and we had a cup of tea and he was explaining stuff. So that, yeah, nice times.
Did you guys ever do any recording at Rockfield?
No, it never did actually, but there is always time.
So here's a question I've literally wondered about for years since I was a teenager. Is She Left Me on Friday based on a true story?
Funnily enough, my daughter asked me that the other day. That's weird. And the answer I gave her is the correct one. And no, it isn't. It's not reality in any way whatsoever. I thought of the line, "She left me on Friday," and then just thought, well, that sounds a bit too lovey-dovey, so I need to counteract that. So to come up with "and ruin my weekend," it just gives the impression that you're a little bit annoyed about it, but by Monday you're over it and you've moved on. So no, it wasn't any. There's nobody from my life that's aimed towards at all. But yes, no, there's no hidden depths in that one at all.
Okay, well, while we're talking about song meanings, I want to come on to Ocean Pie. And also, before we talk about the meaning of that one, that was a Christmas #1 in Thailand, wasn't it? How did you guys generate such a massive fan base to get a Christmas #1 in Thailand in '94?
Well, yeah, that's very true. And the only problem there is this is a very Shed 7 thing that happens. Yes, we did take that off the #1 spot in Thailand way back in the day. But they don't really have a music market as such. So the charts aren't official. I think it was based on bootlegs. So it was the amount of bootlegs sold that particular time. But we sold the most. So it was still the #1. But it kind of waters it down a bit because we didn't get anything out of that.
Right. Fair enough. You didn't get a little chart trophy or anything?
We got a gold disc. We got that, yeah.
All right.
Which I still have somewhere. I think Tom's actually, they spelt his name wrong on it though. So, But yeah, I mean, it was great. We went over to Thailand. We played this huge venue. Everyone looked after us really well. We skipped through customs. It was all kind of proper Beatlemania almost. You go to these Eastern countries, you get treated like royalty, really. It was lovely.
Yeah. So I have to ask, this is another thing, because I've been listening to your music for like 20 odd years now. What does, if you don't mind sharing, what does "You've Got the Key to the Ocean" mean? What's that about?
I think a lot of people don't really even realise this, but that whole song is how I would perceive it to be if you were on heroin.
Ah, right.
I've never taken heroin, but it's what I would perceive it to feel like if you were on it. So the thought of kind of floating underwater in an ocean. You're basically substituting a love song, so to speak, a partner, to heroin, and then it should all kind of fit in and make more sense to you. You've got the key to the ocean. If I take you, then I've got, you are the key to me floating away.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating.
I actually almost got into a fight over that once, because I think I probably must have said that around the time of the single's release and explained this to what I've just explained to you. And then I ended up going out into town one evening with a friend of mine, and 3 people approached me quite cross and started having a go at me for writing a song about something that I don't have any experience in. And it looked like they all had experience in taking that drug, put it that way. Anyway, a little kerfuffle started because I'd written lyrics to a song about heroin without sampling it myself.
The biggest Shed 7 single was "Going for Gold," which hit #8 in 1996.
Funny thing is, it is our highest chart entry, but it probably wasn't the most sold. It just depends on what week you release the single and who else you're up against in the charts that week. I'm convinced that Chasing Rainbows probably sold more copies, but didn't go as high in the charts because it was probably a stronger chart week for new releases.
Let's go on and talk about Chasing Rainbows. That is one of the defining songs of the 90s. It's far and away the most well-known Shed 7 song, 20 million hits on Spotify, which is unbelievable.
I don't do Spotify. I did not know that fact.
20 million hits, mate. 20 million. Can you tell us what that one's about?
Probably for me, it's about being homesick. I remember writing that with Paul right at the tail end of this huge European tour that we'd done, and we were on a tour bus for months, and we were changing countries every 2 days. You know, it takes its toll, 10 men on a bus for months. And, you know, some of the gigs around Europe were great, others weren't so great. So, you know, one night you'd be playing in front of 1,000 people in France, and the next day you might only be playing to 200 in Germany. And also, because we'd been away so long, we were missing family and friends. Might have been in Munich. Can't quite remember the actual city, but I just remember being sat on the tour bus with Paul mid-afternoon. It was absolutely chucking it down outside. We only had a few gigs left to do. And I think Paul was just kind of strumming his guitar and came up with this, what is now the beginning of Chasing Rainbows on the guitar. And I said to him, "What's that?" And he's saying, "I don't know, I'm just making it up." And then literally, it's very funny because it doesn't usually happen this. It's only happened to me maybe about 4 or 5 times throughout our career. But I'm just scrawling lyrics out, and it's pretty much how it is on the record. I'm just writing a story. So it's all kind of free form. And then we thought, right, well, it's sound check time now. So we just took it into the sound check and played it to everybody. And you could tell everyone was thinking, oh yeah, this is interesting. And even our road crew, who were busy doing stuff, setting all the equipment up, even they kind of stopped, which is always a good sign when people just stop what they're doing to listen to it. And this is like the first time we'd played it to anybody. So we thought we were onto a bit of a winner. So we actually took it home and recorded it quite quick because we wanted to get it out the same year as A Maximum High, even though it wasn't. It was on the next album that came out in 98. And I'm quite pleased we did that because that meant 1996 we were the only act to have 5 UK top 40 singles that year. Nobody else did that. And it stood us in good stead ever since.
Well, I'm going to be a really cheeky bastard now and ask another question I've wondered about for ages. When I was a kid, I must have been 15, I think, when that came out, and massive guitar head, you know, buying every new indie single that I could save up to and afford on tape and CD from Woolworths. I remember walking in and seeing the CD cover and going, "That's odd, that. Don't know what I think about that cover." And then hearing the song and going, "That's the best song I've ever heard in my life." And what was going on with that CD? It's a funny choice of cover, that I thought. It was when you look at it and you analyse it, you go, "Oh yeah, I can see." But what's the story behind that cover?
Well, it was just as plain as that, really. It's like not being able to get something that you want. So it was like a bloke waiting for his date to arrive, and obviously she's never going to come. So you just check, you know, it's just a bit of bad luck, you know.
Right.
Funnily enough, we contacted the chap who was on that cover. I think it was last year, because we were going to re-release Chasing Rainbows in lockdown and donate all the money to charity, but it just took so long to get arranged that the momentum was lost, and then people were starting to come out of lockdown, which is a shame because it would have been great if that would have happened. If we were just a few months short of coming out of lockdown, it would have been a lot better. But yes, anyway, we contacted the original cover star and asked if he'd like to recreate it years later, still stood there. And he said he would. He said he would. So we set up a photo shoot in the exact same spot as where he was in 1996, but holding really dead flowers, as if he'd been stood there for 26 years or however it would have been. And the funny thing there was he stood in the exact same spot, and the original cover sleeve, he was stood outside a Mecca Bingo, which is now a Tesco Direct or whatever they're called, Tesco Express. So it kind of all around him shows that life's moved on, but there he still is waiting for this date to turn up. So it's a shame we didn't get to use it in the end, but we could potentially use it at some point for something else.
Man, that is great. That has made it a bit more of a favourite now. That's great. You could almost do like a 12-inch and have that on the front and then the new one on the back, couldn't you?
Yeah, we could definitely use it for something. It just needs to be relevant to Chasing Rainbows, and we've got new music coming, so that will have to take a back seat.
So you guys released your greatest hits album in 1999, Going for Gold. Now, just for the record, I bloody love that album. Not a single dud on it. Every track's fantastic. I remember going and buying that after seeing you guys play Disco Down on TFI Friday. I remember the buzz at school afterwards amongst all the guitar heads going, "Did you see Shed 7 on TFI last night?" I seem to remember that there was a little bit of controversy at the time over that album and that the band weren't really super happy with it.
Yeah, well, I think that was the beginning of the end of being on Polydor Records. So we'd had 3 studio albums, and then it was suggested that we release a greatest hits by the record label. And we're kind of thinking, well, we've only had 3 studio albums, so, you know, yes, we'd had a few hits, but is it too early in our career to be releasing a greatest hits album? So we were kind of a bit against it, to be honest. A lot of artists might release a greatest hits and only have 2 hits on it, and then it's just filled out with loads of fodder. We kind of were made to realise that we had had a lot of hits. And then we were asked to write 2 brand new songs to put on the greatest hits to help promote it, which we thought was a bit weird. But we came up with the goods in our humble opinion. We wrote Disco Down and we wrote a song called High Hopes, which we believe were both going to be released as singles to promote the album. So Disco Down came out and did okay. And then it got to the point where it was time to release High Hopes as the second single to promote the album. And the record label said, we'd rather you re-release Going for Gold as a single to help push this album. And then at that point, we thought, well, no, we really don't want to do that because Going for Gold came out 3 years ago. And we now feel like we really are taking the mickey out of our fans having to rebuy it. Obviously, the record label were just thinking about sales and money. So we kind of took a stand because we felt it was unfair on our existing fan base, even though it could have promoted us to the next league up, really, if we'd done that. So we refused, and then the record label band connection kind of vanished, really. You know, even to this day, we play High Hopes, and it's like it was a single. The way that the crowd react to it, it was like it was a hit, which makes me feel a little bit more justified. And who knows what would have happened if we'd have kowtowed and re-released Going for Gold. I don't know.
Do you guys look back on it with any regret, or have you kind of made your peace with that album now?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's just out there. You know, it's nice to hear people like your good self saying that you were excited when it came out and you love it as an album. So, you know, again, I don't really listen to Shed 7 when I'm at home.
Oh, well, you should give them a listen. They're a good band.
Yeah, I'll give it a go on your recommendation, yeah.
My channel obviously has quite a big Oasis connection. I'm aware that you guys rubbed shoulders with them a bit as you were kind of coming up through the Britpop scene. Did you guys have a good relationship with the Gallaghers?
It was a little bit on and off, to be honest with you, which is kind of understandable, really. I think mid-90s, it tended to be looked upon as a big competition, which I never really got into or wanted to get involved with. And you kind of got the impression that a few bands certainly felt that way. Right at the very beginning, when we started releasing singles, we were kind of almost in tandem with Oasis. We were almost releasing singles at the same time. So we were both getting written about at the same time and both being kind of celebrated at the same time. I think at the very beginning, Oasis probably might, and it sounds ridiculous to say this because they skyrocketed and all good for them. But I think there might have been a little bit of a threat on our part because they believed they were the best band ever. But we were also getting quite good press and being told that we were quite good. So I do remember the first time we actually met them. We'd read about them a lot, but the first time we actually met them, we were doing a joint headline gig in the venue in New Cross. And we arrived sound check time. I think they'd already done their sound check and they were just kind of hovering in the venue, and we arrived. And the first thing that was said to us by Oasis was, "You're going on first and you're not using your backdrop." And that was the introduction with Oasis. And it's like, all right, okay, it's like that, is it? Okay. And then we bumped into them a few times over the years, and sometimes they were being really nice and other times they were being a bit cocky, but that's Oasis for you, isn't it?
Right. So there was a bit of a band rivalry there in the early days, was there?
Not on our part, really. And again, I would say that I'd guess that maybe there was just a little bit of a threat. So it was backs against the walls, but not necessary and not needed. I remember I'd gone to London to do a weekend of press and had to stay overnight in a hotel between the 2 days. And I'm just sat early evening enjoying a drink in this hotel bar, and then Liam walks in with a few of his mates. I don't know what he was doing in that hotel, but he clocks me and he comes over to me and he's going, "Hi, Rick, how's your kid?" Because I'd recently had my first child and he'd recently had his. So I'm saying, "Oh, all right, Liam, yeah, he's doing all right, thank you. How's yours?" "Yeah, he's fine, yeah." So that was all quite nice. And then he disappeared for 20 minutes and then came back downstairs, walked straight over to me where I was still sat in the same place and just said, "York is shit," which is York's where we're from. It's just the place we live in. York's shit. So I'm thinking, hold on a minute. I spoke to you 20 minutes ago and you were asking me how my kid is, and now you're telling me that where I live is rubbish. So, I'm not going to rise to that. I don't care if Liam thinks York's shit. And funnily enough, I've seen somebody who knows him very well since, and he's recently been staying in York and loves it. So obviously his opinion of our fair city has changed massively. But the person I was with took umbrage at being called that where we live was rubbish. So, there was a bit of nose to nose going on in this hotel bar, a bit of pushing.
I mean, let's be honest, I can take a wild guess at what Liam put up his nose in that intervening 20 minutes.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? If you can change your attitude that quickly, yes. What was going on in that 20-minute break? Yeah. I like an easy life, and I don't like confrontation very much. So, we had the option of moving to London when we first signed our record deal. None of us wanted to do it because we just love living in York, and we've got a good set of friends here and our families here. So it was always ace to go away and do our work and then come home and just take a bit of time out.
Well, Shed 7 are still together and still touring, and you've got a big gig coming up with Cast in the next year.
Yes, we've just announced that a couple of weeks ago. We're playing Leeds Millennium Square on the 15th of July next summer, which will be amazing. We did play that venue with Ocean Colour Scene about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. We did 2 nights with them there, and it was great. So we've decided to do it ourselves, and we've invited Cass to come and play with us, and the Skylights are going to come and play as well with us. And hopefully, if things go to plan by that point, we might even have new music out there. So there will be new songs to be heard, as well as obviously all the hits that people like to come and hear us play. I think the plan is to release an album September next year. So hopefully we'll have a couple of singles off that album that people will know by that point, and we'll be able to play them. Usually we would do a Shedcember every other. We play a Shedcember, a big tour at Christmas every other year. So that kind of stops that from happening, having a new album coming out in September. So we'll probably do a few gigs to promote the album in October next year. But then the following year will be 30 years since our debut album came out. So we've got some plans for 2024 that we're just kind of sorting out now. But that probably will involve a huge tour towards the end of the year to celebrate 30 years. As I say, hopefully we'll continue with the success, and we might win some new people over who've never heard of us. Because unbelievably, some people have never heard of us.
Well, some people need to do some digging. Well, Rick, mate, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm a massive, lifelong fan. Thank you for the music all over the years, and thanks for the chat.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me.
That'll do. Perfect.